And I'm Kenny McBride, and joining us today are the recently made redundant, the Parliamentary Assistant to Christian Allard, and the co-chair of the Aberdeen Independence Movement, Fatima Joji, and by Theo Forbes, who's the media officer for the Aberdeen Independence Movement as well. So thank you both for joining us. And our first story today, of course, on Friday, you lost your job. I hate to remind you, but we have now left the European Union. So I suppose the first question to you then, Fatima, what was the atmosphere like in Brussels on Friday, and how's everybody feeling having come out of the EU now?
Well, in terms of feelings, I think it hasn't really set in yet that we've left the EU. I mean, no country has ever tried to leave the European Union, so it's still it's still something to come to terms with. It hasn't really sunk in yet. But in Brussels, I can say the atmosphere, there was a strong sense of support for Scotland to join the European Union as an independent country. We also saw the European Commission in Brussels put at the side of one of their buildings Scotland's name with the Europe name intertwined. So that's a huge indicator of Scotland's position and in the European Union, how it's possible. So despite what the opposition says, we're welcome.
And Christian Aileen and of course Heather Anderson only managed 4 days in post. How are they kind of shaping up now? Do they have plans for what comes next?
I don't know. That's something we'll have to ask them, I think.
Yeah.
But the thing is, we knew this day was coming. We knew that we were going to leave the EU. We just didn't know when, and we tried our best. Our MEPs, the SNP MEPs, I'll have to say, fought very hard to keep Scotland in the EU, because everyone knows we voted 62% to remain, but because of the position we're in, which is a union of unequals, I feel, which is the same feeling of many people in Scotland, we're being dragged out against our will. So I don't know what they're going to do just now, but no, I can see they fought really hard for us. Yeah.
And Theo, obviously you didn't lose a job as a result of this, but as a relatively young person, you've lost a lot of opportunities kind of going forward in your life. How are you feeling about it all?
Yeah, I didn't lose my job, but but it's still, obviously it was a very sad day on Friday. I wasn't in Brussels, but from Aberdeen. One thing I noticed was, especially with people, my friends in Aberdeen who aren't really political, wouldn't ever post anything political or say anything that's very political and stay out of things. A lot of people who I would not normally assume to talk about politics were talking on Friday and about how upset and sad they were, and I think there was a great deal of sadness, especially around my family. My cousin Sam has just married his wife because of Brexit, but they do love each other. So they are going to have a proper wedding, but they've just so they can travel together and she can come into the country a lot easier. So around my family, there's been a great deal of sadness, and I think it's an awful thing that we're leaving the EU. But the particular note that I got from Friday was the amount of young people, my friends who aren't normally as politically engaged, actually thinking about it and discussing how they feel about leaving the EU in that process.
And we've talked a lot about how the Brexit process might affect support for independence. Some of these people that you're hearing are now a wee bit more concerned about what's happening in the world around them. Yeah. Do you get the feeling that, were some of those already independence supporters, or do you think some are shifting over now, maybe?
I actually got one of the best phone calls I've had in so long. And when I was in summer, I was touring. I was in the Isle of Skye. Okay. Got a phone call randomly from my friend Daniel, who is the type of guy who you would never ever think would support independence. And also, he's one of the. I think when you're trying to debate about independence, there's some people that you just shouldn't actually bother trying to win over, because they're never going to get them.
Yeah.
There's that 20% or whatever, and there's the other 20% who are reachable. He was in that 20% bracket that I would never ever assume would ever support independence, and he phoned me and he was like, actually, you know what, we need to get out of this. And that was in summer. And since then he's not changed his mind, and I think he does, he dislikes the SNP, wouldn't vote SNP, a Labour supporter, but has decided that independence is now the right way to go, and that's someone that I would never have ever thought would come to our side.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we've heard even from some Labour representatives. There's been an increasing sense that at the very least it's a question that has to be revisited. Is that a sense that you've had maybe from some of the MEPs who are obviously the most directly affected politicians by this? And maybe just amongst your friends as well, are you getting the sense that Brexit is making people think again?
Yes, definitely, because if you think about it, going back to the topic of independence, many people in 2014, well, there was some evidence that people voted no based on the argument that if we vote for independence, we will have to leave the EU.
Mm-hmm.
But now, so people voted against independence and we're having to leave the EU.
Mm-hmm.
So I do feel that those people are pro-EU folk are thinking, wait, hold on, like, we've been dragged out anyway, despite this promise that we wouldn't be. So I think those people would end up voting for independence if it meant that Scotland is welcomed back in, and we've seen proof of that already. Scotland will be welcomed back in. So I do get the sense that support for independence is going that way because of Brexit.
Mm-hmm. And do you get the sense from the other MEPs from other countries and from the sort of EU institutions that Scotland will be welcomed back?
Yes, well, I did read an article that was in The Guardian that said that some MEPs have already somehow, I think that they signed something, but they've shown their support for Scotland.
Because I think there's the Friends of Scotland group.
Yeah. So and we did actually launch a Friends of Scotland group. I think it was on Thursday or Friday, and apparently the turnout was great. So, and we've also got within European countries, I can say for certain France, that we do have supporters of an independent Scotland, meaning, and this is coming from France, so meaning that they are likely to support an independent Scotland joining the European Union, which France is a part of. And not to mention that we elected a French Scot to be an MEP. So if that's not the best thing Scotland has ever done, to elect a French citizen to represent us in the EU. So I do believe that amongst the MEPs, from what I was gathering, they will welcome an independent Scotland, despite everyone saying that our deficit's going to be a problem. That's just all arguments that the opposition can throw, but I feel, if anything, the European Commission has said, no, Scotland can be welcomed in.
And looking at Brexit itself, how it's going to affect the whole UK, we've heard an awful lot of talk about trade deals, various promises that the Tories and others have made about what's possible, and we've also heard a lot of concern about what might be on the table in the event of a deal with the USA. Do you have, what are your kind of thoughts on this? I mean, what do you think Britain can do? Do you think there are any opportunities that we can have outside the EU that we didn't have inside it?
Yeah, I mean, of course there's opportunities, I think, but what are those opportunities under Boris Johnson? Can he make can he get a good deal out of Brexit? I don't think he's the man who would do anything to be positive, especially for a country like Scotland. I mean, if you look at report after report says Aberdeen's going to be the worst hit by Brexit. And I don't think Boris Johnson's considered Aberdeen at all throughout the whole of the Brexit process, and that's a city that's going to be the worst hit in the whole of the UK, not just in Scotland, in the whole of the UK. So I think this is about who's dealing with this. It's about what kind of people are in charge of these negotiations and these processes. And I don't think there's been any sign of true leadership throughout any of the Tories' dealings and processes throughout the withdrawal of the EU at all.
Yeah. I mean, Boris Johnson, not exactly a man known for his grasp of detail when it comes to policy. Very good at making hectoring speeches, but not so good at the fine detail of these things. Do you have any hopes that somehow Britain is going to eventually come out of this in a better state?
I'm going to say I don't feel so. Definitely not now. And we need to remember the EU bought about half of UK export. So that's a huge gap, a huge plug that we've got to fill. And we've just entered an 11-month transition. So basically Boris has got 11 months to try and get established ties with other countries. So obviously he was trying a Canadian style trade deal. But from as far as I'm aware, that's not an option anymore from the EU. So now he's looking for an Australian style trade deal. And just the whole, if you read what's in the papers, that's not likely we're going to get the trade deal Boris isn't going to get the trade deal that he was hoping for. And we're looking at an economy that has literally stopped because of Brexit, really. Has come to a near halt. So I feel that it's not looking promising at all. We've got 11 months to try and fix this problem. And under Boris, as Theo said, I don't think we're going to pull through this.
And with Boris Johnson's, expert leadership, do you have any hopes? And I think I probably know the answer to this one. Do you have any hopes that Scotland will have any role to play in whatever Boris cooks up?
Well, if we look at history will tell us no. So I'm not sure if he'll change his tune. Maybe I'm being hopeful, wishful thinking, but history has told us no. So for now, I believe no, that Scotland wouldn't really have a voice. Yeah,
I mean it's an odd thing, isn't it, that they constantly talk about we need to come together as a country and move forward together, and yet Boris Johnson has almost gone out of his way to avoid consultation, getting consent from the devolved legislatures. We've seen quite a bit recently as well, more talk about an Irish unification referendum, even in Wales, where the independence movement has been quite quiet for a long time. More and more people saying, actually, we can't do this anymore. Do you have any thoughts on what happens to the UK, I should say, rather than Britain? What happens to the UK as we go forward and some of these stresses in the constitution start to show themselves a bit more?
Yeah, well, there's Scottish independence will bring a lot of challenges to the United Kingdom. I mean, it gives our friends implied a beacon of hope, I suppose. I think actually the independence movement in Scotland already does give them a beacon of hope. I think if you look at, for example, in 2012 we were at just above 20% in opinion polls, and now managed to get to 45%, and now I believe that there is probably a majority that support independence at the moment. So we've already given a beacon of hope to countries like Wales who could eventually become independent countries, but now Brexit brings a different dynamic to it where everyone's kind of questioning how we're going about things, and people in England I feel so sorry for my friends and family in England who have to deal with this and actually don't really have that potential alternative that we do. And we are very unlucky, but actually do have a chance to escape Brexit potentially. But our friends in England, my family in England, are very distressed actually about the way things are going in England and how that they don't really have that opportunity. So I think that Brexit is bringing definitely a lot of challenges to the United Kingdom, and could well see the breakup of it.
Yeah, I mean, you make a really interesting point there. I mean, obviously, it was largely English votes that have taken us out of the EU, as opposed to anything like a majority in Scotland. But there's still 40% of English people voted to leave, and again, there's just this concern about what happens next for all of them. This is something that has been talked about in the context of independence as well, this idea of being good winners. What do you think could have been done? What do you think the Brexiteers could have done that might have helped us to move forward together, as they keep telling us they want to do? Do you think there's anything that they could have done that would have brought the country into some sort of consensus about how to move forward?
Well, how they've gone about it has really been a slap on the face for Scotland. The fact that Scotland voted 62% to remain, and they've literally put things like a no-deal Brexit on the table. So if they didn't put that on the table, first of all, recognising that in a union of equals, you've got Scotland, for example, that voted to remain, they could have taken that into consideration. I think it would have helped a lot to see that's at least Scotland's voice, a country on its own as well. Despite voting part of a union, you need to respect that we are in a union of equals, at least listen to the other countries as well. So if they took a no-deal Brexit off the table, I think it would have had a slight impact, not a big enough impact as not even calling for Brexit in the first place. So I think that's one thing they could have done differently.
And Theo, what about you? Do you think there's anything they could have done that would have let the Remainers feel like they hadn't been just insulted by the way things have gone forward.
Yeah, I don't think they've gone about anything too politely, to be honest. What they could have done as well, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of people that wanted another referendum on it. I think that would have caused challenges too. But I think the way Brexit went, especially under Theresa May and then Boris Johnson, there was so much twists and turns and things that people didn't vote for that Brexit. People didn't vote. They voted for a slogan on the side of a bus and populist rhetoric that didn't appeal to me, didn't appeal to Scotland as a country on the whole. But yeah, I mean, they could have gone about the whole process in a much more civil manner without being so authoritarian throughout the whole thing, especially with Boris Johnson now as well. He's just sort of fired through, oven ready. So yeah, definitely.
So what lessons do you think there are for people in the independence movement then? I mean, if we do get another referendum at some time soon, if we do win independence, what does the yes side need to do to make sure that we don't have this kind of bitterness, this kind of people feeling betrayed, lied to, whatever? How can we make sure that doesn't happen to Scotland?
So I feel what we're doing at Aberdeen Independence Movement is actually an important step, because we're actually considering local issues in the whole independence debate, rather than looking at it just on a national level, because then important arguments, important local issues kind of get lost in all the mix. So if people who are voting independence are aware of how it will actually impact them locally, I think that's a good way to ensure that they're aware of what they will be voting for and how it'll impact them directly, rather than putting national arguments that might not directly impact them and then at the expense of ignoring local arguments. So in a way, people won't be lied to, they won't be, oh, but they didn't talk about this is a problem we face, like now it's going to hurt us. So I think Aberdeen Independence Movement, we're giving the people of Aberdeen the opportunity to consider how independence will help us.
I think that's incredibly important, actually, localism ahead of any referendum. I mean, in 2014 the Yes campaign was very centralised, was very central belt focused, and that didn't work in Aberdeen or North East or rural areas. I think if there's another campaign, it does need to be far more localised, and I think it's groups like Aberdeen Independence Movement that are actually, we just produced a documentary about Aberdeen's economy. That's going to appeal to people in Aberdeen. They're going to see a personal side to that. They're going to see why they are directly affected by that. But also, I mean, I think when you compare the 2016 referendum and the 2014 referendum, they're entirely different things, aren't they? I mean, in 2014, I was saying this yesterday at AIMS conference, my tutor on Friday was asking, she was like, just so I know, why are you all interested in politics? Why did you get engaged in politics? And about 70% of the people in the room all were sitting in that classroom because of the 2014 referendum. I thought that was absolutely incredible. I mean, you're looking at like my generation, who are all now far more switched on in politics than they would have been if there wasn't a referendum. People saw 2014 as inspiring and motivating and an actual chance for change that politics had never brought before. So I think in 2014 it was actually, I think the Yes campaign were in many ways very successful, but ahead of another referendum it does need to be more localised, but continue to have that message that shows that we can create a socially just society that we did in 2014.
And this goes slightly off where we were planning to go, but as a Glasgow-based broadcaster, we have to talk a wee bit about West Coast bias. So how big an issue is that for people in Aberdeen? I mean, I went to university up here, so I know a wee bit of how the rest of the Central Belt gets looked at from up here. But to what extent, I mean, in terms of the independence movement, in terms of Brexit, in terms of all news really, how different is the view from the North East, do you think?
So, a lot of the independence campaign, I think the 2014 referendum, we did produce a white paper to make it clear, something that the Brexit campaign didn't do. I think our research was very good with the white paper. But I do feel that the 2014 referendum, we do have the tendency to be more West of Scotland based with issues, Central Belt really, and the rest of Scotland in a way gets either overlooked or not given enough attention. So I do feel that there's a bit of reluctance from the rest of other areas in Scotland to see the independence argument in that way. So, yeah.
What about you, Theo? How do you think certainly the media like us? What can we do for those of us stuck in Glasgow to try and include places like the Northeast more in these conversations?
Yeah, I mean I think it's still a problem with the independence movement. It's things like national organisations having meetings every month in the Central Belt. There needs to be a spread of where the meetings are. It's little things like that, I think, that we could actually do on improving. I think that a lot of people in Aberdeen in 2014 did notice Central Belt bias. I noticed it quite a lot in my family, who are massive Yes supporters, massive Yes voters. All sort of noticed that as well. But I think when you're having a national campaign, there is obviously there always will be that Central Belt focus. I mean, it's the largest populated area of Scotland, but I think it is campaigns and organisations like Aberdeen Independence Movement and local branches of political parties and groups that need to make a local aspect of that. I mean, we don't need a national campaign to release that documentary today, but that documentary might help convince a couple of hundred people in Aberdeen that independence is maybe the best bet for their city, which the Yes campaign probably couldn't do if it was a more general focused argument. So I think what we can do is we can get out there ourselves and start to make the change by doing it ourselves. Just go out there and do it, and I think that's what we did with the documentary anyway. Going out there, getting our message across, and trying to plaster it to people who are undecided and not on our side yet. And that obviously goes into the idea of speaking in our own political bubble as well. We do too much of that, so we need to just appeal to people who aren't on our side yet, but make it localised. And I think that can be done with local Yes groups.
Yeah, and looking at the future generally, whether it's as part of the UK or as part of an independent Scotland, clearly Aberdeen is going to go through some changes. A city that's been heavily reliant on the oil industry for a long time. And of course now we're getting to the serious point where we may have to just say no more oil. That's clearly going to have a big impact on Aberdeen. What do you think we need to do as a country to help Aberdeen through that transition?
Yeah, our documentary is actually economic case for independence. It does look at Aberdeen, a city in transition. So we do have to realise that it's important in this city to diversify our skill set, and we need to be able to adopt measures that would give people the skills and opportunities they need to look beyond working in the oil and gas sector. I do feel there's potential within the oil and gas sector, but there is also potential to branch out, and we have a lot of natural resources as well, so that would work. Yeah.
And Theo, you've been making this film, Aberdeen, a city in transition. Is that that's what it's called?
Yeah.
So you can find that on YouTube once we're finished watching us here.
Yeah.
So tell us just a wee bit about what's in the film and how that
that
worked out.
I mean, it's got the likes of Kirsty Blackman, Alex Russell, Gordon McIntyre Kemp, top economists and oil experts throughout it, and it's about, I suppose the main message is about a transition in the oil industry and whose hands that's best in, whether it's best in the hands of Westminster or an independent Scotland. And it's obviously, I mean, that's what we're trying to focus on, areas that is directly affecting Aberdeen. I mean, so much of my friends' parents and stuff, all oil based. Throughout the city, you can't escape the oil industry. So that's why we've done the documentary. To try and get that message out about when there is a transition, whose hands that's best in, because I mean history shows that the best hands are definitely not in Westminster's.
Yeah, I mean the oil industry has been kind of a cash cow for the UK ever since the late 70s,
that's the thing. I mean, if you look at Aberdeen as a city benefited from the oil industry. I mean, you look at Union Street right now, it's in a very sorry state. I mean, Aberdeen as a city is benefited with income for families, but has the city made any big... Would you walk past Union Street and think it was the oil capital of Europe? I mean, probably not. Yeah.
Aye, so just then, as we do go forward, what do you think? I guess coming out of the film, what do you think the future does look like for Aberdeen then?
Well, I mean, as we can see, it's meant to be the worst hit by Brexit. I think Aberdeen and that's the thing. I think in Aberdeen in 2014, did we vote 41% yes? I think it was around about
something like that. Yeah.
I think that Aberdeen is going to be one of those cities that we need to be showing how much it will benefit from independence, because the way the UK is going, Aberdeen is going to be very badly hit. And when there's that oil transition, hopefully we'll be an independent country, and that will benefit Scotland, well, Aberdeen even. But until then, I mean, Westminster has not helped Aberdeen. I mean, the people of Aberdeen, Aberdeen's economy has obviously done well with the oil, but the people of Aberdeen, has it lost its communities? Has it lost a lot of the history about Aberdeen, and it's lost. You'd think that an oil-based city would have beautiful streets, and it's been left behind by the oil industry. It's been forgotten about, the people in Aberdeen.
Do you think part of that is just generally that Aberdeen's not somewhere people in the West Central Belt ever see much of? So if you can't even get Scottish politicians to look up, then
I didn't realise this was such a thing. But my mates, I had an event on. It was called Yes to Our Future. It was about engaging young people ahead of a referendum. This was 2 years ago now, I think. And my mates came up from the Central Belt in Glasgow, and they were all like looking out the window like, this is mental. Like all this grey stuff. But I go to the Central Belt and think the same about you guys, because I remember, not so much now. I've kind of got used to the idea that not everything's granite, but especially when I was younger, I remember going to Glasgow and Edinburgh being like, whoa, is this what places look like? And it's like becoming so used to Aberdeen and how Aberdeen is. It's very unique. But I remember my pals in the car coming up just being like, whoa, like what is going on, and just being so amazed by this city that's a little bit up there they've never been to before. But I just assumed people went to Aberdeen. Apparently they don't. I suppose my favourite thing about Aberdeen is how easily accessible it is to get to the country. Not the city itself, I suppose. So but yeah, I've not been very happy with the responses from some of my pals from the centre.
And as we're talking about this oil transitioning away from oil, I mean, clearly that's not going to happen overnight. So what are the kind of specific things in Aberdeen that need to be developed or supported or changed in order to make a future for yourselves?
So I do know I can't say about the fishing industry. I did work for someone who was on the EU Fisheries Committee. 70% of the fishing lands in Scottish waters. So I do believe that this fishing industry, with the required support, with a lot of fighting for it, can help Aberdeen's economy as well. We need to give a lot of attention to that. We are a city that's great for culture. I think we really need to look at our tourism industry as well. I think we really need to develop that. We have a lot to protect and fight for in Aberdeen. As Theo mentioned, we're going to be the worst hit by Brexit. And the reason why I'm a really hard pro-Indy supporter is that I see the opportunities. I see an alternative reality for us is one of Brexit, and the evidence that we're going to be hit worse, and the potential for a decline in our standards of living and many areas in our sector, or we look to independence and the opportunity for Scotland, for us, in Aberdeen to have a say in the direction we go, and also the adopting models like the Nordic models, tried and tested models that can actually help us improve and diversify our economy. So you've both mentioned this a couple of times, this idea that Aberdeen is going to be the worst hit city in Britain by Brexit. Why is that? Is that related to the oil? Is it related to fishing, or what is that? So as I mentioned at the very beginning, the UK buys about half of the EU buys about half of UK export, and Aberdeen is recognised as an industrial city, and we're also the oil capital. Well, we were the oil capital of Europe. Yeah. So if you think about it, we had quite a high position within the European Union, and being taken out of it, that's all going to change. So it's going to have a lot of impact on our oil industry, on our city, on our basic position as an industrial city. So
is that going to affect the workforce, or is it
job losses? It will definitely have a big impact on our economy. So, and the economy is very important for the whole of Scotland. That's a known fact. And so we are an industrial hub. So basically, yeah, I do feel that. Yeah.
And do you get the feeling in Aberdeen and the surrounding area? Do you get the feeling that again, as we said earlier, like that Brexit is worrying people? Brexit is making people maybe look again at the independence question.
Yeah, because the people who voted who voted against Scottish independence have felt betrayed, because some who voted on the basis that we'd stay in the EU, now we're still being taken out of the EU. So I do feel people have been betrayed. So obviously opinions are changing. People are waking up to the reality that listening to Westminster's promises are not working out for Scotland, because they're always broken.
Yeah, I think, in Aberdeen it's a lot about the economic side of what leaving the EU means to Aberdeen, but also it goes further than that. It's about our communities in Aberdeen. Aberdeen is got a huge community. In Torry, the population of EU citizens is very large, and then we rely on a lot of EU citizens throughout the city. So it goes more than just the economic aspect of it. It goes about who lives in Aberdeen, who calls Aberdeen their home, and how Brexit's going to affect them. But also, it's not just the economic side of Brexit as well, it's the democratic side of Brexit. I think people are waking up to the fact that Scotland has been ignored throughout the entirety of our Brexit. And I think that a lot of people are beginning to see that Scotland has been left as this, locking Nicola Sturgeon out of anything they can, and how undemocratic it is for Westminster to say, nah, you can't have your referendum. Whereas actually we've got a mandate for it. I think we've now got 2 mandates for it.
Several.
I suppose
there's maybe 3, I don't know, but I think people are waking up to that and realising that Scotland has been ignored and treated incredibly badly throughout Brexit. We have been treated horribly by the Tories through the Brexit negotiations. But when it comes to the democratic case, I think the democratic case for independence, I think is so much better than it was in 2014. And I think in 2014 it was pretty good as well, to be honest. But now I think it's out of question that it's not sustainable for Scotland to remain in the United Kingdom anymore. It's simply not unsustainable.
Well, we will get back to talking a wee bit about independence more generally, but there are a couple of other things happening in the world. First one, of course, is the coronavirus. We've now heard that over 300 people have died. There are now a couple of confirmed cases in the UK. There's been some person-to-person transmission in Europe that we've heard about, and we're now seeing another load of British, I guess, almost like refugees, I was about to say, but people being evacuated from China as a result. I guess the first question is, how worried are you about coronavirus?
Worried in the sense that the way a virus spreads, but considering I do feel that we're actually proactive in the way we're approaching this, so I'm not that worried about where I am just now. If I consider I'm in Scotland, I'm in Aberdeen, so I'm not that worried about the coronavirus, I have to admit. Maybe not the right thing to say, but yeah. No,
I'm not sure what the correct approach is yet. We were saying just before the show, I can't decide whether or not it's one of these like end of times plagues, or if it's really just China getting panicky because they had such a bad experience with SARS. What's your feeling? Are you?
I'm a bit more worried now that you've asked me. If I'm honest. I don't really know. I'm probably like the same with Fatima. I'm not too worried. But the news. That's when something like this happens. The news it's always in the news, and that does worry you. When people ask you if you're worried, I suppose that does make you more worried as well. But yeah, the news does give you a bit of fear. But I wouldn't say I'm too worried.
Yeah.
Aberdeen.
Yeah,
we've been proactive in our approach, so
as Theo says, it is one of those things that the media loves to get hold of, and we have been talking about it a bit on the show, because obviously it is a news story, it is something that we need to keep an eye on, but I'm glad you two aren't too worried. I'm sorry if
no, it's okay.
I'll put the wind up you there.
You gotta go start looking up and see if it's in Aberdeen yet.
In other terrible plagues, the Labour leadership contest is still rumbling on. Keir Starmer has kind of shifted a wee bit to the left, kind of talking about maintaining some of Corbyn's tax plans and whatnot, basically trying to squeeze Rebecca Long-Bailey out of the race. Lisa Nandy is still in there, the heroically undemocratic candidate for Labour leader, and Emily Thornberry, who still hasn't actually made the ballot due to a lack of support. Emily Thornberry was also saying today that the Labour Party needs to kind of remain a Remain party. It needs to kind of make the point that actually we should get back into the EU. Rebecca Long-Bailey said, we can't possibly go into the next election telling people, na, we told you. So, I mean, on the very kind of most basic level, who do you think's going to win?
So I've been following this very closely, actually.
Okay, good.
I've been having quite a few discussions. So I have to say I wasn't really a fan of Jess Phillips, so I'm actually glad she's not in the leadership race. I don't know how much trouble that will get me into. But Keir Starmer, I do think he has quite a good chance. Although, and he does show support for Scotland having its independence referendum. But the thing that worried me is that he said if Scotland gets a clear mandate, which means in a way he's ignoring the fact that we already do. So that kind of worries me. I'm just like, is he really in support, or is he just saying the right things? Because then he would need to recognise that we already have a mandate too, in fact. So that's what I'm worried about when it comes to Keir Starmer. Emily Thornberry, I have been listening to a few of her interviews, and she is growing on me, I have to admit.
Okay.
Yeah, but I do feel Keir Starmer might end up being the winner.
Mm-hmm. And what about you? Do you have a prediction?
I think Keir Starmer will probably be the winner, but I've actually been the opposite. I've been trying to keep out of it. I've been avoiding the whole thing. I saw I switched it on and saw the Emily Thornberry saying she hated the SNP.
That's nice. And I must have missed that.
That was right, wasn't it?
I don't think it was Emily Thornberry. It wasn't Emily Thornberry.
It wasn't. No.
No, who said she hated the SNP? I forgot the name of. It wasn't Emily Thornberry.
It was they've now pulled out, have they?
It was definitely a Labour Party member, but
I think there was a candidate for the elections though.
I can't remember.
It could have been Jess Phillips.
It wasn't Jess Phillips.
It could also have been Lisa Nandy, who doesn't like
but
democracy in Scotland.
It was a hustings, I think. And
I
just switched it off straight away because I've just been totally zoned out of it. I've obviously been a big focus on the documentary in the last couple of weeks, but I've totally been disillusioned by the Labour Party in the last couple of years, and I've totally. I mean. I can't even remember who said it, so that's how much I've been out of depth in it. But I think from what I've read and stuff, I think Keir Starmer will probably win. And I think some of the stuff he's been saying has been quite welcome, but for how long? That's the other question. I don't know. I think he kind of goes to different places to appeal to different people. Yeah,
I mean, the Labour Party has been in a really difficult position for a few years, especially in Scotland. I mean, in Scotland, the collapse started a bit sooner. And has perhaps sunk further now, but the idea of the party not being able to unify behind leaders, not being able to stop from infighting, not being able to set a consistent policy on things, these are all problems that have dogged the Labour Party ever since they lost power at Westminster, certainly. And then before that, there was a lot of feeling of betrayal from people who felt that the Blair years weren't living up to the promise that people had expected. If just looking at Scotland then, what do you think the Labour Party needs to do to kind of recover some of its support?
Definitely a unified message. I think they need to distance themselves more from UK Labour, to be honest, because I think UK Labour has had a negative impact on Scottish Labour as well. I do feel Scottish Labour had a chance under Kezia Dugdale. I do believe it did. It's now we've only got one Labour MP from Scotland now. I do believe. Yep. So I feel Labour has basically been wiped out in Scotland. So I do believe that if they get a clear message, if they show themselves in a unified front, I do think that they might come back from this 10 years from now, maybe. I think it'll take years to build up the trust and the support they had. And I think in an independent Scotland, they would do even better, I feel. I think they'd be able to build themselves up even more.
Yeah, I mean, we've all said this at some point, is that in an independent Scotland, Labour would probably do very well. but it seems to be the one thing they're just not willing to
There's
contemplate.
been a lot of betrayal in Scotland with the Labour Party. I mean,
Yeah.
my entire family are all traditional Labour voters who now pretty much all vote SNP. And it's a strange place because Scottish Labour they've had a nightmare actually in the last couple of years, a total nightmare. And I remember I was having an argument on Twitter with an Aberdeen Uni Labour student from their society, and he was arguing for socialism, but at the same time backing Aberdeen Labour, who all the Labour councillors in Aberdeen City Council are in bed with the Tories.
Yeah.
And I was like thinking it was a bit. They're all over the place. I mean, I would love to see a Labour Party that was a Scottish Labour Party that was left wing in an independent Scotland, as you were saying. I think could be a brilliant. I think independence is a brilliant gateway for the Scottish Labour Party, to be honest, and I don't see how they can't see that.
Yeah.
So in order to get support back in Scotland, I would say to support Scottish independence and get away from your continued support of the United Kingdom. That would be what I would say to them.
Yeah, I mean that's something that it does seem that a majority of their members now support at least having a referendum, and yet Richard Leonard, when he tried to kind of move the conversation about the Constitution on, he got slapped down by the rest of the SEC. Do you have any hope, or hope's maybe the wrong word, do you have any expectation that Labour is going to get things together in the next few years?
To be honest, I don't know, because right now, if what's happening now is any indication, they won't. They've imploded, they don't have any clear messaging. Jeremy Corbyn sitting on the fence, not being clear on his position. A lot of people don't know what they were voting for. And to be honest, I don't know what Labour is now. Where do they stand?
Yeah.
That's the thing, and that is I don't feel they're making enough effort to sort that out. So I don't think it's anytime soon, and I don't think I have quite a bit of hope.
So if you were somehow to become Labour leader, I mean it seems unlikely. But if you were, what do you think your plan would be to try and bring things back?
My plan would be to come out in favour of supporting independence and arguing for a Labour Party in an independent Scotland running the country. I'm not that. I mean, I've my whole family are always talking about how gutted they are about the state of Labour, but I've never grown up in a situation where the Labour Party have been good. Since I've been engaged in politics, all I've seen is Labour Party destroying themselves and infighting. So at the moment, I'm an SNP supporter. I like a lot of what the SNP does, and I think the SNP do a lot of good for Scotland, and I personally like to see the SNP run an independent Scotland. But if I was the leader of the Labour Party, I would probably be trying to get away from the UK rhetoric and trying to argue that independence brings the Labour Party in Scotland a host of new opportunities. Yeah.
Well, on that note, we do come to actually on our list of topics is independence. We have talked a bit about it because it touches on everything that happens in Scottish politics now. But we heard the First Minister make a speech on Friday setting out her next steps, which appears to be keep working at it, get the question tested and hopefully be ready for a referendum later in the year. We also saw the Green Party on Friday relaunch their independence campaign at Greens for Yes, which was a wee bit unexpected. The Greens have been a wee bit more tentative in supporting independence. It is officially party policy, but they do have a number of members who aren't pro-independence, so it's something where they don't try to make it the central focus of their work, but they are now going pretty full-throated saying, no, we need to have independence now. So I suppose the question is, where do you think the independence movement is just now? I mean, both in Aberdeen and nationwide. Where do you think we are now, and what do you think has to happen before we can get this referendum?
We have had this discussion actually within the Aberdeen independence movement about going forward, especially post Nicola Sturgeon's speech, where she did mention an independence referendum. She does want it this year. That was clear in her speech, but the condition is that we need to do it properly. We need to be patient in our approach and not try and be all radical and everything. The point is to keep convincing the unconvinced. So with regards to the way forward with the independence movement, I think we shouldn't stop campaigning. I think we should keep campaigning, keep building the support base, because I feel 51%, as the poll suggests, is not a really good thing to be settled with. Let's get that up to 60. Let's make it a great distance. So don't wait for a date for the independence referendum. Just keep going. You can take it at a gradual, steady pace. Put on campaigns, put on events, reach out to people. I think the independence movement needs to remember that and stop waiting for a date.
Yeah.
And that sounds like you're kind of in agreement there.
I think for some aspects you do need a date when it comes to like mobilising support from people who aren't already activists and campaigners. I think that will spark a motivation to become active, involved in politics. But you don't need a date for us to be campaigning for independence. And I think what we need to do now, I thought it was brilliant from the Greens. Absolutely fantastic. That's what we need. We need different voices leading the independence movement from all different aspects. So what I think we need to do now is we need to start a young people's campaign generally. I think, as I mentioned yesterday at the conference, that I think Generation Yes is getting relaunched within the next month or two. That's a huge step. I mean, Generation Yes was incredibly successful in 2014, and I think right now is a perfect time to get that relaunched and have a young people's campaign for independence. Because I think when you look at it, it's young people that are going to inspire older generations to vote yes. It's young people. We give that link to the youth, and we're going to help convince those who are yet to be convinced in the older age brackets. So I think a nationwide young people's campaign for independence is vital in the next couple of months. And as Fatima says, we don't need a date. We need to push forward. I think the grassroots need to keep pushing forward. And I think that we need to, media like the documentary we've just created, we need to keep doing things like that, and we need to keep having training workshops, and I think become as prepared as we can be for when there is a date. And I know that there's always the marches and stuff, and I know a lot of people are either huge fans or hate them. I'm in the middle. I actually do think they are quite good for motivating people within our movement. I don't think they've convinced that many people, and if everyone at the march was out in the door, it would probably be a bit more helpful. But I think it does help motivate and inspire people to get more involved within the independence movement.
Now, you both mentioned that we're still waiting for a date, but that we don't have to wait for a date to be actually campaigning. How much of a difference do you think it would make if we did have a date to get to? Because one of the arguments we hear a lot from unionists of various kinds is that people are sick of referendums, people are sick of voting, which I think is an awful thing to think about in a democracy, but that people just are sick of all the arguments. People are sick of referendums. We've had innumerable elections in the last few years, and that there's just this fatigue. Do you think if we did have a date set, do you think that would kind of wake a few more people up and make them really consider the issues that they've tried to tune out for the last couple of years?
Yeah, I'm not denying that a date would actually be useful, would actually make a huge impact on motivation and support and campaigning, because it will also help independence groups to be able to plan their campaigning and have something to work towards. I feel that the reason why I said that we shouldn't wait for a date is that we can't just stop and then just pick up.
No.
Yeah, when we hear of something. So that answers your question. I think you were just talking about
I'm just curious as to whether you think that will be the difference maker that pushes the number higher than that 51%.
It will wake up people who want something to work towards, but those of us who are probably already convinced shouldn't stop. And
I mean, how much leeway do you imagine there is? I mean, we've heard a number of people talk about wanting to get up to 60% consistently before we could have a referendum. That has always, to me, seemed like an impossible goal, because until we have the date in sight, a lot of people are just not going to think about it. And if you phone them up, they'll just tell you what they told you in 2014. Do you get the feeling that once a date is announced, we will just see the floodgates open? And
I actually do think so. I would like to think so anyway. That's what I've thought for the last wee while. I think, I personally actually do feel a bit depleted. I feel like I feel like there's and sometimes I feel like there's no because there's no date, there's nothing set in stone, and I think that the Scottish Parliament elections next year also bring a host of challenges to our movement, for different reasons, but it does, I think, a date of course would engage and encourage people who aren't active to get involved, and I think it definitely would, but for now I think it's actually Friday's announcement, as much as a lot of people are complaining about Nicola's speech, I actually got a bit motivated from that, and realised that this is going to happen at some point, but as I said, the Scottish Parliament elections brings a new challenge to us. I mean, it does kind of put us in a situation where we've kind of been put in a back corner, and if it does come to the Scottish Parliament elections next year, I think it needs to be the SNP are arguing to be elected on a mandate for independence.
And is that a strategy you would be interested in, or?
I wouldn't completely I think Theo, me and Theo, were mostly on the same page with the Aberdeen independence movement takes that position as well, to a large extent. So
Okay, so I guess we've only got a couple of minutes left. So I suppose what's your prediction then? Do you? I love making people make predictions, because we can always go back. We can always go back and show clips of what you said later in your career. So do you suspect that there will be a referendum this year? First of all.
Yes. No, not this year. Sorry, I'll retract that. I'm afraid not. We've got 11 months, so we're in the middle of a Brexit transition. I want a independence referendum this year. I'll make that clear. But whether or not we'll get it, that's the thing. If we're looking at the fact that we have to go through Boris in a way, I don't think it's likely. I have to be honest about that. But I hope I'm wrong.
Yeah.
I'll make that clear. Yeah.
And Theo, have you got any hope, or you kind of got half an eye on that election? As
I think actually I think I can't. It was the end of last year. I actually thought I really kind of thought we were going to have a referendum this year at the end of last year, for some silly reason. But now I think it is very difficult. I think it's going to be very difficult, and I think the Scottish Parliament elections is probably what will give us that mandate. And that is another mandate, hopefully. But it does, as I said, there is the issues of the SNP maybe not getting a majority. So I think my prediction is that the Scottish Parliament elections will probably decide whether there'll be a referendum or not.
Yeah. Okay. Just one last thing then, which I've now had a complete blank on. But yeah, where? Excuse me. Sorry. If we do kind of not get a referendum this year, what do you think the strategy is going into those elections in 2021? Is it just the SNP standing on a mandate for independence, and we just need to clear 50% in that election? Is that what you think is the most likely route at this stage then?
Yeah, despite arguments from the opposition from the most recent election, the SNP have always made it clear that we are a party that supports independence. We're pro-independence, because the opposition did try to claim that we didn't make any mention of that, but we've never said we're not.
No.
Yeah, and they kind of made the argument for us that we're always pro-independence. They made that clear across all the material. That's all they spoke about, the Conservatives in particular. But I do feel that for the Holyrood election, we should really re-emphasise, we should go in hard about our pro-indie stance, and I do think so. We should adopt that strategy of making it clear our position on independence, like that. Yeah.
And if that is the way it goes, Theo, do you think it can be won through an election in a system that was designed to keep majorities from happening?
Well, there's obviously that both votes SNP thing. There's that whole debate. Getting an independence majority in the Scottish Parliament, I think, is what we should be aiming for. I mean, I'm obviously an SNP supporting member, but I'd love to see more Green voices in the Scottish Parliament.
Same.
So that would give us a mandate as well if we had the majority of independence.
Cross-party support.
For independence, yeah. That's why I'm arguing for the Labour Party to come on board as well. That might help us a wee bit as well. But I think that I'm speaking on an SNP kind of viewpoint here, but when the SNP have the elections in May, it needs to be a massive focus on independence, but also on their record and how well they've done in government.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is just about all we've got time for today. It's been a different show. We're not in the studio, obviously. We are in Aberdeen. We'd like to thank our friends here at the Sportsman's Club in Aberdeen. They've been excellent, making us welcome, helping us get set up here. I'd like to obviously as well thank Fatima Joji and Theo Forbes for joining us, both from the Aberdeen Independence Movement. Theo, just tell them again where people can find the film. What's it called?
It's Aberdeen, a city in transition, and it's on YouTube now, on Aberdeen Independence Movement's YouTube channel. Brilliant.
Well, I'm sure everyone will go away and tune into that as soon as we're finished here. I'd like to thank you for joining us as well. It's always a pleasure to have you. If you're able to help us in any way, please go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up as a supporter. Your £5 a month makes such a difference to what we're able to do with Broadcasting Scotland. It makes us able to do things like come and visit Aberdeen and do a show up here rather than being stuck with our West Coast bias in Glasgow all the time. If you're not able to support us financially, don't worry, the shows will always be free to view online. But if you want to help, try sharing it around, stick it up on your Facebook, on your Twitter, email it to somebody, scribble the address down on a bit of paper for them. And let them search for it themselves. The only way Broadcasting Scotland can grow, we don't have the money to start advertising. The only way we can grow is if you help us spread the word about what we're doing here. So that's your job for the week. So from Fatima and Theo, once again, thank you very, very much for being here. It's been a pleasure talking to both of you. Thank you to the City of Aberdeen for having us as well. It's a lovely place. I've not been back in almost 20 years, and it is a pleasure to see what's changed in the city. But until tomorrow, we will be back with Scotland at 7, obviously. And until then, I've been Kenny McBride. Thanks very much for joining us, and have a great day.